I don't waste my time with it. I mean, even back when that guy sexually harassed me, right, in the office, and it was going to be my word against his, and Barbara said, "You can sue." And I took a breath and I said, "Barbara, if I sue, I'm going to be wrapped up in this for 10 years.
Yeah.
I'm going to walk away." She offered me an assistantship with Merv Adelson, her then fiance, who was running Lorimar at the time, which is a film distribution company. And I was like, I can't be an assistant anymore. I really appreciate this offer, but I have to go forward. And that led me to knocking on the door of the factory, which led me on to producing for film and television.
Right.
And blah, blah, blah. Like a dream. Right. Or I could have stayed in that rage and that anger. And it would have been Groundhog's Day over and over and over again, trying to get justice.
But
I mean,
love...
yeah.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
What if the truth came in a gel cap and we could just pop it in our mouths and forget about it? Well, it doesn't, and we can't. But we can laugh in the face of reality while plotting our survival. Welcome to the Truth Tastes Funny podcast. I am your host, Hersh Rephun. And if my guests can handle the truth, so can you. Open wide, folks. Here it comes.
My guest on Truth Tastes Funny today is Susan Gold. Susan is an author, a transformer, and a consultant. And she also seems to be pretty good at convincing people to do things that perhaps are in their best interest, but they may be reluctant to do. She's worked with people like Andy Warhol, Donnie Deutsch, Roger Ailes, Ben Stiller, Jack Black, Taylor Swift, all celebrities that she got to appear on Phineas and Ferb. And so it's a fascinating story, I'm sure, because you cannot get from Andy Warhol to Roger Ailes to Jack Black without some kind of interesting trajectory that happened along the way. Susan, welcome to the show. Susan Gold.
Hersh, I'm really happy to be here, and I'm already laughing.
Well, that's good, because truth tastes funny, and in order to make it through life on Earth, on this planet anyway, we have to have a sense of humor. And I also want to mention your book, Toxic Family: Transforming Childhood Trauma into Adult Freedom. We're going to talk a lot about childhood, a little, somewhat about trauma and about genetics and family histories and stuff like that. But we can start really wherever you like to start, so long as it has some connection to humor and funny, because I know that that's going to be another area that we have in common.
Humor and funny. Oh my gosh, what isn't, if you really come at it with new perspective, like what an amazing walk we have in this big freaking schoolroom. I just think next time I'm going to look at the fine print before I come in.
Into the classroom before you come into the classroom. Yeah. Well, tell me a little bit about your history and your book and what inspired you to write it. Why don't we start with the book?
Oh my gosh, Hersh, I went kicking and screaming. I think in 2007, an Irish seer told me, "You have a book to write and a lot of people are going to be helped by it." And I just shoved that under the closest carpet. There was no way I wanted to go through that exercise, of writing a book, really. And then in 2019-20, I had back-to-back intuitives tell me, "You have a book to write." And the third one told me, "You have 3 books to write." And I was like, oh, fluff. At
that point, they're just piling it on. They're just having fun at your expense. You could have called me, even though you didn't know me at that time. You could have called me and I would have said, "Yeah, you know what? You got 6 books to write. You better sit down and write those books
right now." And I did. I sat for 15 minutes a day in front of my computer, whether I had something to write or not. How's that for being kind to self?
It's good.
But it gave me a manuscript within the first year. But I had no connection to it. And a really wise friend said, why don't you take like a pass back through there and come at it from little Susie's point of view, that one that's been through this whole story. And so I thought, okay, cool. And it's not so much like the black and white of my life story really shifted that much, but my connection to it really did.
Okay. Well, we'll expand on that a little bit.
Well, I didn't think my life story was really that unique or interesting. And so when I was encouraged to write about it, I thought, okay. And then when I sat down and really went through it, I was like, oh yeah, I have had some cool experiences. I came from a really tiny town in the center of Pennsylvania. My dad is a genius astrophysicist. He still lives in that same teeny tiny town. And my mom was equally as genius, but she didn't have a chance at higher education. She had 5 kids before she was 30 and felt super saddled. And, my dad played the role of Peter Pan, and she soothed with a lot of food, a lot of food. And back then, when you had that issue, they prescribed diet pills. And I think I was like in my 20s when I realized, wow, diet pills were speed back then, like straight speed.
Yeah.
So it was like an alcoholic and a speed freak at the helm in my house. And it was pretty crazy and ridiculous. Now,
so Peter Pan was a drinker.
He loved to uncork that bottle at 7:30 a.m. You'd hear the cork pop off and you'd hear glug, 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 glug.
Well, he was a physicist, you said?
Astrophysicist.
Astrophysicist. So astrophysicists have a different take on time, on space. So probably, 7:30 in the morning to have a bottle of wine to him is not what we perceive, morning drinking as. There's probably a deeper, there's a deeper level to it. Or maybe not. Maybe it was just a little bit of a problem. I don't know. How did it translate into little Susie's experience?
I'll tell you what, I didn't have anything to compare it to, but I knew something was off, and I knew it was off early. I think I was 2. My first memory is 2, and then again at 4, and by 6. I was looking at that carving block and the knives, surveying the blade, thinking if I could just lance one of these through my tiny chest, I'd be exited. So it was pretty rough. But it was also a lot of fun. There was a lot of chaos. There was a lot of fun. I mean, my dad was a big kid, so you can imagine, what was going on. And it was very competitive to get any kind of attention or love. So it was like, the Kennedy family on acid times 10. So I left at 17, the morning after I graduated high school. And I had a vision. Like I was 10 on my beanbag in my basement on my belly, watching Barbara Walters. And I wanted to go to New York City, Hersh, and be like her.
Yeah. Well, and you wanted, so wait a minute. So this was after finishing high school?
I finished high school on a Friday night. We graduated, and Saturday morning I split. I went to the beach. I worked at the shore. My dad had a former student who owned a couple of amusement piers off the boardwalk, and my sister was down there with a couple of college friends. So I crashed at their place for the summer, went on to college, couldn't wait to get to New York. So sophomore year, an alumni came through and told me she represented artists. She was in arts management, and I had never heard of that. I was like, "Ooh, what's that?"
Right.
And so, I wrote her from the beach that summer and said, "I want to come next summer and intern for you." And she wrote me back saying, "We need you this winter. We have our first Broadway season." So I negotiated my way out of school. It wasn't popular then to do internships. They wanted you to stay in your track and, pay your loot and pass go. But I negotiated my way out. And I was 19, living in Greenwich Village on my own.
Wow. And around when was this? Like what era exactly? Like
it was like 80s. It was 80s back then. Yeah. And then I went right after college, right back to the city. And I worked for ICM, which is a large global talent
Yes.
agency, and I couldn't make enough money to meet my bills as an assistant at ICM.
Shocking.
So, yeah.
Shocking. And if you would go
So,
through this system at ICM, it would take forever to,
oh,
to
Hersh,
climb up the.
there people from Yale and Harvard and like all the Ivy Leaguers in the fluffing mailroom for like a year
Yeah.
or 2 years. Yeah. But I got a little gossip from one of the mailroom guys that there was an opening for the head of the commercial department, and I got that spot.
Oh.
Then I needed to train people on the side to make a little money, exercise, personal train, and
Mhm.
Barbara Walters became my client.
Wow. How did that happen? So that was a kind of a full circle fulfillment of a prophecy that you had in a way. You were inspired to go to New York to somehow be like Barbara Walters. She ended up becoming a fitness client of yours.
And a
Interesting.
friend.
And a friend.
I rang her bell at 7 a.m. for a session one morning, and she answered the door and she's like, "Susan, get in here. What's going on?" She was a good interviewer for a
Yeah.
reason. She was highly intuitive, and she got it out of me within minutes that I had been sexually harassed by my boss the
Yeah.
day before, and I was mortified. I was like still in shock. And she said, "I'm coming to work with you this morning. We're going to confront this guy together."
Wow.
Yeah. I got it, Barbara. It's okay. I confronted him, and he asked me if I had everything I needed. I said yes, and he said, "Okay, you're fired. Get out." And gosh, I think I had 2.5 months of cash in the bank. I was living on my own. I was newly sober. Yeah, some of the flags were surfacing early in my 20s.
Right.
Replicating the same behavior that I had seen demonstrated growing up.
Right. Right.
And yeah, I was newly sober. I was just extricated myself from an abusive relationship where the guy held the purse strings. I'm embarrassed to say, but that was the truth. And I was determined that I was going to somehow make it and not be an assistant. So I decided to match celebrities with brands, and somehow got introduced to Donnie Deutsch, he's a show host, an icon, an entrepreneur now. But back then, Donnie was running his dad's ad agency. And he said to me, "Can you get me Andy Warhol for the Pontiac dealers? They're my client. I really want Andy Warhol." And I'm like, "Well, I'll try." So I called. Nobody's picking up the phone at the factory. So I go down there on the subway and I knock on the door, and Fred, Andy's business manager, answers. He's looking at me through his horn-rimmed spectacles. And I'm like sheepishly explaining why I'm there. And he said, "Okay, come back at the same time tomorrow. I'll let you talk to Andy." So yeah, I was waiting in the foyer. The next day, the double doors opened and it was dark in that studio. I was terrified. And Fred peered his head out. He goes, "Okay, Andy, we'll see you now." I'm like, "Okay." So walk in, there's this pin spotlight coming down on this platinum hair that's going 17 different directions, and a lot of scribbling going on. But more importantly, there were 3 pugs, those little dogs with the smushed up faces. Yeah, they were running around all over the studio, and Andy
Snorting,
was like,
just giving that labored breathing that they have,
and drooling a little bit. But they loved to tug on Andy's pants, and then he would lift them up and cuddle them like they were little babies. And I was in there yammering away about why I was there for the spot, and
Pontiac.
he wasn't.
That's the funny thing, is to get an audience with Andy Warhol. And then what do you have in your quiver? A Pontiac dealership campaign or something.
Talk about feeling vulnerable. And he wouldn't make eye contact. He would not make eye contact with me. But like my spidey sense, he wants this deal, or otherwise I wouldn't be here. Right. And he wants the connection, but he doesn't want it without a cover, and that's his dogs. So finally, he looks up at me and he goes, "Now, really, why should I do this?" And I paused and I said, "Because you can have the pugs in the shot with you."
Nice.
It worked. He said yes.
And
so did Donnie Deutsch, thank God.
So how did it work? Were you on set for that? Was it
Yeah, I was on set. I was barely breathing. I was praying it was going to go as planned. And it did. It was fairly straightforward. And then that set the tone for me and my career, matching celebrities with brands
Right.
and sort of being known for that. And that led me to Roger Ailes. And I couldn't get anybody to go to his network and not main talent. You know, he wanted main talent on his, and they weren't coming. So finally, I grabbed a cameraman one night and I said, we're going to this red carpet event. And I'm going to interview people, and then they're going to look right to you and they're going to tell you their name and that they're watching this network. So that's what we did. We got celebrities to say hello. They're watching, you know, Roger Ailes' network, right? And Roger was so happy. I worked for the head of promos, showed up. He's gold, get in here. I'm like, oh, fluff. You know, what did I do now? It's like, Mr. Ailes wants to see you up in his office right away. Okay, you know.
Yeah.
So he gave me that interview that he gave all his victims. I didn't know this until after, but yeah, asking me some funny questions, but ultimately said, you know, I'm really impressed with what you've done for the network. Name the show you want to produce. And that's how I started producing.
Wow. Well, so let's transition now, because this would be a fascinating career story just to talk about the career element of it. But I think what's really important is transformation and digging deep and, you know, confronting the stuff that we're carrying with us into these situations. So when did that trajectory, do you feel, or that work begin for you?
So I think I mentioned a couple moments ago about the red flags surfacing early, and I was replicating behavior that I saw demonstrated in my home. And some of that was really positive. Like, I was very independent. I was a risk taker. I was very creative. And I was also highly intuitive and empathic, meaning I could sense the emotions of another in the room. And also, when I was a kid, especially, I can do it now if I meditate, you know, for long periods of time, but I was actually telepathic. Like, I could get full sentences of, you know, what you were thinking, and adults didn't really like that. So,
Yeah.
But I took that into the workplace with me, and those moments of transformation, being able to transform that trauma into creative brilliance in the moment, you know, and also just having to face alcoholism and addiction, you know, and then it was clinical depression and learning about that and how to work with that. And then it was ultimately narcissistic abuse, you know, so like, it's almost like each decade was a new, new topic of trauma that would surface, and I would be able to step up to the plate and ultimately embrace it with love and understand I had an opportunity either to fall down and exit, or to step up and transform, and to see it as soul evolution. That's been hugely transformational and a real pivot in my life.
Do you find that in the wake of the pandemic, you know, people are becoming more introspective about this stuff and more exploratory about their trauma, their childhood traumas, their adult trauma, you know, whatever they might be going through that is affecting their lives?
I think that's one of the most profound blessings of that whole experience thrust upon us. And yeah, there's a proliferation of that kind of conversation that there never was before. And there's a proliferation of people coming forward with their stories and sharing how they walked through them. And that, yeah, I think is amazing as a collective, that we're able to step up and out of a matrix that really didn't fit and was kind of broken.
Yeah. And that we, in a lot of ways, create, we do these, you know, it's like, if you look at it as you mentioned the classroom, you know, the beginning of our conversation, life is kind of a classroom, the world is a classroom, and yet there really is no teacher. You know what I mean? If we talk about, God or higher powers or those are things that we're coming up with, that even if they exist, we're coming up with the notion of it. It's not like you walk into the classroom of Earth and there's a teacher sitting at a desk, and so we create this construct of education and societal norms and all of those things. What is your take on the human experience, and how is it best experienced in your view?
Well, sit down, because I spent a lot of time in Southern California, so a
Yes.
lot of this could be like super hooey, but
Yeah.
yeah, for me, I believe I created it with options before I came in. Like I wanted to have certain experiences for this soul, for this lifetime. And so I set it up. I was in the perfect position in the middle of those 5 kids in that house in central Pennsylvania with the parents that I had. And I respect and love them for the roles that they played. And that turns some people's hair green when I say that, but that's how I feel. And I feel like my players in my own movie have been perfectly cast for me to make a choice for the potential of the opportunity of growth and soul evolution. And I've tried my best to step up and walk through each one with love in my heart. And it hasn't always been there, honestly, but it's been a lot of work and a lot of self-discovery for the truth to taste funny now.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing that we search for, we always can distill themes and things that happen in our life into one, thing. But I think what we really search for more than anything else almost is control. We want to control an outcome of some kind, if it's whether it's, physical pain or wealth or our job. Control is really what it all comes down to, right? Because if we can control the variables, we can control the outcome. If we can control the outcome, we have whatever it is that we're after, and so when it comes to the issue of control, and you're let's say you're consulting with somebody, you're trying to help somebody through what they're going through, how much emphasis do you put on relinquishing control or seizing control?
Well, for me, it's a surrender. It's a complete surrender. And, my viewpoint is a little unusual. I mean, to lift up that boulder and see the moss, but no, it's not moss. That's actually the beauty, right? To look now back at some who I feel were my predators and perpetrators, and to see them as actually gifts in perspective and with hindsight, that takes a release of the control and a release of the standard paradigms and viewpoints. So we work a lot on surrendering control and seeing and not tit for tat and not laying in the victim role.
Yeah.
And
I was just gonna say that, Susan, that it sounds like retribution isn't a big theme for you. It's not.
I don't waste my time with it. I mean, even back when that guy sexually harassed me, right, in the office, and it was going to be my word against his, and Barbara said, "You can sue." And I took a breath and I said, "Barbara, if I sue, I'm going to be wrapped up in this for 10 years.
Yeah.
I'm going to walk away." She offered me an assistantship with Merv Adelson, her then fiance, who was running Lorimar at the time, which is a film distribution company. And I was like, I can't be an assistant anymore. I really appreciate this offer, but I have to go forward. And that led me to knocking on the door of the factory, which led me on to producing for film and television, and
Right.
blah, blah, blah. Like a dream.
Right.
Or I could have stayed in that rage and that anger, and it would have been Groundhog's Day over and over and over
Yeah.
again, trying to get justice.
But
I
I
mean,
love.
yeah.
No, go
You
ahead. Go ahead.
No, you
Okay,
really see it
okay.
when you try to divorce a narcissist. That's when you really see
Oh,
it.
I was going to mention, well, the next thing we'll come back to is you had mentioned in your bio that your ex-husband was your greatest guru. You framed it that way. So I want to talk about that to pick up with what we left off. But I don't even remember what my comment was, because then you said that. Where were we when we were?
Oh, we
what
were
was
talking about holding on to anger and resentment
Oh, right.
tangentially.
Right. And I think that if you have, this is what I was going to say, if you have created the world, if we've created the world that we're coming into, so to speak, and we look at it that way, we've mapped it out with lessons and with mountains and exercises and things like that, then that harassment issue had served its purpose as far as you were concerned. You were like, okay, there's not another pursuit that I have with this issue, with this person, this 10-year odyssey that you could have gone on for justice, which would be reasonable and make sense because we all kind of seek justice, but there was other stuff for you out there. And then you pursued that other stuff. And now I wanted to go back to the ex-husband being a guru.
Well, I went from New York to LA for what I thought was going to be this amazing career move. And it was a great gig. But really it was to meet the man who would be my ex-husband. And it was kind of Hersh, like kismet, like perfect storm, like all the elements I learned in my upbringing. And as, a producer and an entrepreneur, and through recovery from addiction and being a longtime meditator and struggling with depression and endurance athletics, it all came into this one perfect storm of this divorce process from the man that I had truly loved, and was trying to keep that marriage together, even though I knew the expiration date had expired way long ago. And took them to mediation to create a post-nuptial agreement to try to get some kind of fiscal integrity to the table. And he went along with it until the last point, when he folded his arms and his eyes went in those cold slits. And he said, I'm hiring an attorney and I'm filing for a divorce. And that intuitive voice that we all have, came flying over my right shoulder and in through my body. This is the universe doing for you what you cannot do for yourself. I mean, since second grade and Billy Fritz on the playground, there had to be some guy in the picture, some boy, some male attention for me to feel whole. My friends would say, you're so accomplished, you're so capable, you're so responsible, So that experience was really a pivot. And that's why I call him my greatest guru. We went back to what was our home that I had purchased for our family, maintained. He took up residence in the master. So I, by choice, took a mattress across the house into a partial conversion in our garage. And that became my monastery for a year. I held no contact, meaning no verbal contact and no eye contact with him for that year. And within that year, I could write him his 6-figure check and send him on his way to his next source of supply. And I call him my greatest guru because that's when I learned my authentic power.
Okay.
Being in that room in the garage, I went deep in, and the long-term meditation, holding silence, holding no contact, that came into play. The tenacity and focus of being an endurance athlete came into play. What I learned to survive in my family of origin came into play. And he taught me my authentic power. And he taught me true compassion for my own being. Because back then it was, I was so codependent still after like tons of self-exploratory work. And that's why I call him, and that's why that truth tastes funny.
Yeah, we're really hitting that point because sometimes it's framed in the sense of how we manage truth, how we digest it, how we process it, but we don't get that much into the fact that it tastes funny beyond that it's strange or it's absurd or it's unusual. But I think it's also the way we swallow our, perspective or our perceived norms of what everything is. And in a way, I find myself getting to these places where, all bets are off, so to speak. You're like, okay, I gotta take a step back from this thing, but I don't have to just take a step back. I have to astral travel, to get far enough away from this issue to really see what's going on, because it's not something typical. I don't even know if typical is even a thing. But what happened? What going back most recently to like before the pandemic, and then, after is when you wrote the book, right? You wrote the book recently.
So I started writing it in 2020 and it just published in March of 2023. So a couple months ago, published.
Okay. And what came along with that? Work-wise, life-wise, what other things have been part of that picture?
Massive changes, Hersh. I was happy in LA. I thought I'd never leave the state of California. My son's in college in California, but there goes that nasty little inner voice, It's really congested here. Your central nervous system's really on fire. Oh, they just put a 5G tower on your neighbor's, curb. Your dog's going psycho at 4:30 every day. Something's wrong here. Your solar panels are going to cost you money soon.
Yeah.
You're going to be, capital gains tax is going to be doubled by the governor. If you don't get out of here soon, you're not going to win on the house.
That's a lot of voices. That's a lot of information that your inner voices are giving you.
Yeah.
But
so,
it does sound overwhelming.
I started to look around for a quieter, softer life experience. And when I lived in New York City, I had a cabin up at the Catskills and it was my sanctuary. And honestly, a lot of people that moved from New York to LA really miss New York City. I didn't, but I missed that cabin in the woods in the Catskills with a view. So I started looking, to see where I might want to move. And Montana, where I live now, was not even on my bucket list, but somehow the universe has reassigned me, and here I am happily living 4 miles from the Canadian border.
How did Montana rear its mountains to you?
Yeah, I had a friend who lived in Montana and invited me to come take a look. So I went for my first look in mid-January, Hersh, because I didn't want any illusions about what a Montana winter was after being in LA for so long, But when I flew in, it just was magical. It felt like, Lost Horizon or Brigadoon or Camelot. I mean, it was just the feeling. And I didn't have that feeling in the other places that I had checked out. So that caught my attention. And then the immediate vicinity where my friend wasn't a fit. But when I took a ride, further north, I went, oh, wow. And it just hit me hard. This is it. This is where you belong. So I went back and put my house on the market, and I was moved within 2 months, moved.
Yeah. And what are the winters like?
So come last October, I was kind of anxious because I thought, wow, I haven't been through a winter in a long time. What is this going to be like? But it wasn't that bad. For those that would see, this is actually a photo out my side window. I can't shoot into the windows, too much backlight, but I live on a prairie, and I live in they call it the banana belt. And the Indians were really smart because they used to gather here but it can be like full snow in town, which is 5 miles to the south of me. And if you go 3 miles north to Canada, it can be full white blanket snow. And here I can see the prairie grass. It's kind of bizarre.
Wow.
So the snow is less. And there was one 25 below degree day in early December, but it was super sunny and it was so pristine, beautiful. I didn't even mind the cold. It was bizarre. But, check me out after I've gone through 5 winters and we'll see where we are.
Well, I've done 7 winters in Iowa, and I believe that technically that's the maximum, but I don't know. But I think we may have another one on deck. But the good news is that with climate change, there's so much diversity in the weather systems that I don't even know if we technically will have seasons much longer. You'll just have, certain incidents, certain systems that move through. So you might have a summer-like system that moves through, but then have hail or any of the other plagues that might befall us. It's an exciting, it's a thrilling time. It's pouring right now. It's pouring right now outside my house. It was, sunny when we started this conversation. And so we don't know. So there's more that we could talk about, but I want to be respectful of the prairie. And so if you could, you're speaking to an audience of, and I don't use this term lightly, but I do use it somewhat broadly. Survivors, the people who like this show tend to be people who have gotten through the last, that could be their whole life, or it could be this last stretch. But a lot of us and a lot of the people that I hear from have been pushed to the limits of their capacity to understand the world and the madness of the world, and sometimes the cruelty, sometimes the grace. But for people who are doing this day to day, doing battle, getting through, is there a thought that you could impart to them?
Don't quit before the miracle. So I believe that we have purpose in being here. Each one of us, we have purpose and we have worth and we have value. And I think this was a hot ticket to pull from the Mega Universe lottery. And I know that we are not here by accident. So don't quit till the miracle. And I'm telling myself that on a regular basis, because yeah, it's beautiful. We're ascending. I mean, I know my own consciousness has risen an octave and a half for certain, but man, is it disorienting and confusing and painful. And so that's what I'm telling myself. Don't quit before the miracle.
Thanks so much for tuning into Truth Tastes Funny. If you enjoyed the experience, please leave a 5-star review and share this podcast with your friends.